you have studied oligarchy. You have studied the ultra-rich. As you were watching today, I'm going to assume, you were struck by the scenes of the collegial atmosphere.
Yeah.
Was that odd? Do we normally see all the titans of industries and things in the front row, the box seats?
No, this is really different. And in fact, I was reflecting on how different this is even from Russian oligarchy, because...
Don't now. Okay, that hurts.
Sorry.
That actually hurts.
Sorry. Well, you know, at least Putin had a very clear red line with his oligarchs. The grand bargain of the early 2000s was he was going to let them get rich on condition that they kept their noses out of his political business. At most, they would be his errand boys from some diplomatic missions in Europe, for example, on their super yachts. But that was it, and it ended there. And he made a huge example of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was the Yukos oil chairman, who dared to stand up for transparency and human rights in Russia. And that earned him almost a decade in Russian prison and seizure of all of his assets by Putin. He was lucky to escape with his life.
Oh. And so you're not expecting any of our oligarchs to be like, hey, watch what you're doing. Like, none of that.
No, but what Trump has done is so extraordinary because he doesn't have that bright line with the new oligarchs of America at all. He's basically said, okay, you bought it, do what you want.
But he's blended them. I mean, this Doge, I mean, he's brought them in to the table. But is there maybe something better about that? Because the explicit bargain is, now you have to give us money, or you have to bring business to America.
Well, for me as an American, this is not good news because I like democracy.
Tell me more about this. I want to hear about this.
Yeah.
I like the sound of it.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid I'm going to have to be sold.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the Broligarchs, and this is even different from oligarchs.
Stop. Okay. If that's not trademarked. Broligarch. Nice.
So we've had oligarchs in the past in America. We've had Carnegies and we've had Rockefellers. But aside from making sure they didn't get regulated or taxed too much, they kind of stuck to their own business. They just wanted to get rich. But the Broligarchs really have an explicit political agenda, and it is essentially anti-democratic and almost monarchical.
So you see them more as like they're in the king's court, and the world has been returned to the more natural order of noblesse oblige or something along those lines.
Well, they're going for noblesse without the oblige. They want all the privileges and none of the obligations.
In terms of charitable funding?
Philanthropy, any sense of social norms constraining them. I mean, what they're all about is nothing can constrain me. I mean, look what happened when the EU tried to impose its own laws on Elon Musk. J.D. Vance, not even the vice president yet, rolls up on the EU and says, you leave our boy alone or we're going to pull out of NATO.
Wait, that's what he said? You made this sound very Crips versus Bloods.
Well, there is...
J.D. Vance rolled up on the EU? He just got out of his Benz and went inside and was like, listen to me.
With the eyeliner and everything.
Right. Craziness. So they are explicitly, but then what is the political philosophy? Is it just the great man theory that you know, the irony of a populist movement relying on the great men to control all that happens?
It sounds a lot, actually, like the divine right of kings, but with a pseudoscientific spin. So that's where you get all the Elon bros talking about being high-T alpha males. That's just a 21st century way of saying, God says I'm the king and you all need to bow down.
But at some level, don't you think they're just trolling people with that? Like, do you actually believe they think, I have a high sperm count, so I feel, yes, I don't know how we went off the rails on that, but that feels a little bit like, how much of this is trolling and memes, and how much of it, for me, they feel a little bit like, look, we had a Gilded Age. It doesn't seem that different from the Gilded Age that ushered in industrialization, although now it's more on the digital side. Would that be a charitable way of putting it?
Well, I think it's different from the Gilded Age in two important ways. One is the release of the oblige part of noblesse oblige.
Right.
These guys are totally released from the constraints of social norms that said it was stigmatizing to sit on your wealth like a dragon on a hoard of gold. You had to show that you were doing something for society.
Is that why? So when you look at all those like national parks of Rockefeller, or you look at all that, that's why those guys did that?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't necessarily have to be fans of humanity, but they cared about their reputations. And
Right.
in order to keep a decent reputation, you had to be seen to do something, throwing the public a bone, as it were.
But isn't that what these oligarchs now, isn't that what their first wives are for? Isn't that like what it seems like now is they divorce their first wife, and then their first wife is like, give this all to Planned Parenthood.
Well,
Like, is that the oblige that's coming out?
I only know about the case of Mackenzie Bezos doing
Right.
that.
I think Melinda Gates also gives a tremendous amount.
She too, yes.
Yeah.
She is doing her part. But it almost seems as a middle finger to the ex-husbands, like,
Right.
I'll show you the proper use of wealth, USOB.
Really? Interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about, though, when we look at the Russian oligarchs, you talk about Putin is utilizing the wealth of these men, I guess, to fund some of his endeavors, or just the amassing of that money covers his own corruption?
My understanding, I'm not a Russia expert, but my understanding from reading the work of people who are,
Right.
is it's sort of like a pyramid scheme or a mafia operation where the capo de tutti capi sits at the top and takes a percentage of what the lower level henchmen are getting. So, he takes a chunk of Yukos oil and he takes a chunk of Gazprom, and that way he stays the
Holy
wealthiest
shit.
man in the world. Yeah.
They're earners. So Vladimir Putin, like, runs Herbalife. Like, that's what this is.
Yeah.
And for Trump, he looks at it as like, I will take my power that I have in government and I will amplify it through industry. But through industry, look, it's almost better to me that it's this explicit. Like, I feel like now we have a number on what this type of crony capitalism looks like. Elon gave $270 million to get Donald Trump elected. He made, after the election, I think something like $210 billion. So now we have a number on it. We know what their access to government is worth. Is that transparency better for us to even know? Can we do anything about it if we don't even know?
Well, I think you make a good point. It's better that we know and that it not be happening sub rosa and, in whispers that we can't really define in any way. It's all cards on the table now, and it's almost like it's being rubbed in our faces.
Right. How do you battle? So when you have something that's the state power of the United States, which is utterly enormous, combined with the corporate power, I mean, I always viewed government in some ways as hopefully a check on corporate power. But if it's a lubricant, what does that turn into? And again, I apologize. I just realized,
Yeah, you went right from sperm
yeah, I
count to
apologize.
lubricant.
Not good.
Well, it's obviously something very dangerous, because what we're seeing here is the total release of all democratic constraint and all pretense to social norms that used to constrain these people.
Right.
They're totally unfettered in their access to power and in their sense of what is okay to do with that power.
But were we kidding ourselves in some ways? I saw a gentleman who was trying to become the new DNC chairman, gentleman Martin, I think his name was. And he had said about money in politics, oh yeah, we're gonna get all that money out. We're gonna have our good billionaires, but we're not gonna take any money from the bad billionaires. And it reminded me, I once had Nancy Pelosi on it. She said, money corrupts in politics. So what about the money Democrats raise? Oh, no, that doesn't corrupt us. Like, there's this sense that, oh, no, it's only those actors that are bad. I mean, the oligarchs gained trillions during the Biden presidency.
Yeah.
So are we kidding ourselves that this wasn't in place, just not maybe as stated as clearly?
I would want to move away from individualistic explanations of like good billionaires and bad billionaires and talk about like, what do we as a society say we're not going to let you get away with that? Because historically, that's been the only thing that's constrained the really rich. If you go all the way back to the Medici in the 1400s, they weren't necessarily good people, but they were the richest people in Europe. And the reason we have the Renaissance and all of its great works of art is because their society wouldn't let them get away with just sitting on their hoards of wealth and enjoying it for their own benefit. They had to do something for their society.
Does that mean we're allowing ourselves to be bought off? Is the idea being like, look, you guys amass what you need to amass at the top, you pull the strings you want to, pull, we need 2 parks. Like what, and this gets to a larger conversation about labor and capital. How does American labor tap into that money stream? Because that money stream is built on the backs of American labor, yet they don't have access to it. What if we allow them their excess, but rather than philanthropy, is there a way to attach, to make American labor also a shareholder in that?
Yes, but you could say it's the hard way, so to speak. One of the wealth managers I spoke to in the course of studying offshore finance over 17 years, he was a historian. And I mean, he trained as a historian at one of the Oxbridge schools in the UK. And he said,
it's one of the finest historian institutes.
And he was very candid about his role in making rich people richer at the expense of the rest of us. And he said, well, once that ball gets rolling, it becomes quite difficult to stop it short of like revolutions or mass general strikes. And I think historically that's what we've seen. We're at levels of wealth inequality unseen since the Gilded Age. And what happened then? Well, we had a world war, we had a pandemic, and then we had the rise of fascism. And in between then, we had a lot of labor action in the U.S. So if labor unions are able to muster enough power to stand up to some of these oligarchs, they could be a force for good.
It's so dispiriting to hear that same message for labor of like, you guys just need to get together and get better lobbyists. Like, and there is something here that seems almost more difficult, which is this rise of populism mirroring this Gilded Age. Fascism was not blended with the Gilded Age. The Industrial Age was. And so I don't know that we've seen this before. And I hesitate to say that, but it does seem unusual.
And what's really kind of surprising to me about this is that what's really needed here is a way for people to coalesce and organize themselves to stand up to these individual accumulations of power in the hands of the Broligarchs.
But the law's not on our side. The law is basically now saying corporations are people, money is speech, and so how do you... Well, boy, I hate to see someone who studied this for so long to you go like, you know what's terrible to me? And I'm like, what? No!
Sorry.
You study this.
Well, as you correctly point out, like, where does the wealth actually come from? It comes from labor. So if labor gets together and says, we're not going to stand for this anymore, or if consumers get together and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore, there are way more of us than there are of them. The problem is that the weird twist in the wonderful world of the internet and social media is that rather than giving us a means to coalesce and come together, it's divided us into these little bubbles or camps that are at war with one another.
Which I'm guessing now is maybe the overt strategy.
Yeah.
Because that's, in many ways, how they generate the income. Because the overt strategy of the algorithm is to conflict and outrage.
Just last week, there was a scholarly journal article published by some political scientists in the Netherlands that looked at who generates the most misinformation on social media. And they found it was really asymmetric. It's almost all coming from right-wing populists. And it's not an accident. That's their strategy.
Holy shit. For a second there, I thought you were going to say me. made me really nervous. Thank you so much for this. Offshore is the book. It's available now. Brooke Harrington.